The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Harborough again, everybody. Now we're beginning this week with a lovely village. You can see around me I'm in a modern estate here, but that doesn't really tell you the whole story about this place, because this is a very lovely ironstone village. There's a few hills to encounter in this one as well, so hopefully I'm prepared for those. This is the lovely little village of Great Easton. Great Easton, East Farm, Large. This week on TVI we make another return to Harborough to take on another 5 villages. All of these are located close to the county border with Rutland, and I think some of these could well pass for the best villages we've covered yet in Leicestershire. Let's see if you agree. To get things started this week, we're in Great Easton, which White's Directory of Leicestershire in 1846 described quite nicely as a neat and well-built village on the banks of a rivulet. Well, not much has changed. Great Easton is located in the attractive countryside of southeastern Leicestershire, close to the borders of Rutland and Northamptonshire. It lies in the Welland Valley, around 9 miles to the northeast of the nearest major town, Market Harborough. This is one of the larger villages of the Welland Valley. It's compact in shape, developed around a rectangle of roads. These roads are linked by a series of jitties or alleyways. In addition, there are 3 roads to the adjacent villages of Caldicot, Drayton and Horninghold. The Domesday Book showed the place name as Estone, and it was in the possession of Peterborough Abbey. Church ownership continued for a long time thereafter, with several local farmers renting land from the church commissioners. By the 16th century, the village was called Easton juxta Welland, later becoming Easton by Welland, Easton Magna, and finally Great Easton. And really, since the 17th century, very little has changed here. Great Easton has lost its shops and a few businesses like pubs and Moore and Haddon's corset makers, but it's remained pretty and really welcoming. Let's go for a walk and see if it still is. The present layout of Great Easton is medieval, although there has likely been some sort of settlement in the area since prehistoric times. The land around Great Easton has a long history of being agricultural, and the development of the village is intertwined with that farmland. In 2003, archaeological work undertaken here by Channel 4's Time Team showed that in around 800 AD, farmers started to leave their scattered farmsteads to live more communally. That resulted in a clustered settlement spreading downhill from the church to the area of the present village. At first, they called that village Estone, probably referring to its geographical position to the east of Medbourne, or perhaps Bringhurst, thanks to its important church. We'll learn more about its connection to Bringhurst tomorrow. Let's focus on the western side of the village first of all. This is what it looked like in 1900, and as you can see here, it was mainly farmland. A lot of this has been built over now, and I want to begin with this area here. It's mostly 1960s housing, but part of this land now contains a playground with a tale to tell. Ever since 1974, most of Great Easton has been a designated conservation area. The boundaries of that area take in 90% of the village. This area, though, is one of the exceptions. It's a housing estate consisting of 3 streets: Home Close, Barnsdale Close and Clarksdale. Most of this was built in the 1960s, although Home Close is a newer addition. To get to the main bits here in Great Easton, our first task is to cross a small field known as Clark's Piece. Now, at the top of this estate, you can find the local playground / recreation area. Now, this is called, as you can see, Clark's Piece. Now, How did it get that name, I wonder? Well, as always, there's a story behind that name. Let's tell it. Clark's Piece is the only recreational land the village has these days. It used to have a playing field where cricket was once played. The cricket club actually still exists, but now they play in a different village. We'll learn more about them in a future episode. Clark's Piece was the brainchild of its landowner, Nick Clark. Since the village had no recreational facilities after the old cricket pitch returned to agricultural use, he decided to make a new area for the local children. Nick always had somewhere to play cricket or run around with his friends as a child and wanted something similar for the children in the village today, so he donated a piece of his own land to make this new recreation ground. Unfortunately, he never got to see this bit of land in action. He passed away from a brain tumour before his idea could be brought to life. That's where a group called Handmade Places came in. They, with help and funding from Wren, converted Nick's empty land into a natural play area. This now has a mixture of play equipment and provision for sports and games such as football goalposts and a basketball zone created on a square area of artificial sports surfacing. None of this would have been possible without Nick Clark. The name Clark's Piece is a fitting tribute. Brilliant little heartwarming story there about Clark's Piece. Now, we are on a footpath here which leads from Clark's Piece into the main village. Everything you've seen so far has been fairly modern. Well, the rest of Great Easton is a lot different. It's a lot older. Let's go and check it out. After walking across Clark's Piece via a footpath, we find ourselves in the north of the village. This section will see us take in two former pubs, both of which are marked here. Neither are still in business though. We'll also see the ancient church in this section too, dedicated to St Andrew. Great Easton has always been a traditional farming village, and it remains so today. Much of its historic character comes from the relationship of farms and fields to the housing and other buildings which form the settlement. In general, Great Easton is a quiet, tranquil village, but it's still agriculturally active. The peaceful nature of it can be periodically disturbed by farm traffic, but that's to be expected, given that it still has a working farm just behind the church. Some of the street names in the village reflect the integral role of farming here, like for example, Musk Close off Broadgate. This is named after the Musk family because these houses were built on their former paddock. Another example is Moulds Lane that connects the High Street to Brook Lane. Again, that refers to another agricultural family. The Moulds once farmed in Great Easton and built a set of cottages for their workers in 1913. The prominent building material in Great Easton is ironstone. Roof materials are a mixture of thatch or Collie Western or Welsh slate. A lot of buildings show a characteristic feature of the Welland Valley, striped stonework formed of alternating bands of brown ironstone and Weldon stone. The combination of materials on display here once led the historian W.G. Hoskins to describe Great Easton as the most attractive village in Leicestershire to look at, with its groups of fine ironstone farmhouses, manor houses and cottages nearly all built in the first half of the 17th century. We're on the High Street briefly now, and next to see is the Grade 2 listed Granby House. The current building dates from the late 19th century, although we do know it's been rebuilt. That's because it was first licensed as a public house in 1753. It was the Marquis of Granby. It held its status as a pub until 1914, when it closed and became the house it is now. It was a very prominent pub, one of 6 that Great Easton once had to its name. The Marquis of Granby was often used as a communal venue as well as a pub. One of its larger outbuildings was used in much the same way as a village hall, hosting things like dances and similar events. Before the current village hall was established in the 1950s, this was the only go-to place, so this house can claim to have played an important part in village life. So everything so far has been a gentle climb uphill. You remember at the beginning of this video I said there are some hills involved here. Well, now we're going to get to the top of that hill by using this path here. This will take us up towards the church, and apparently when you get to the church there's an awesome view at the top. From a distance, the size of the village is often obscured, seeing as most of it lies in the low flat land of the Welland Valley. However, the spire of the Grade 2 listed Church of St Andrew the Apostle helps to identify Great Easton from far away. Mostly made of ironstone, this church stands on an eminence some 15 metres higher than the lowest points of Great Easton. This dates mainly from the 13th century, but herringbone masonry in the west wall provides evidence of an earlier building of either Anglo-Saxon or Norman origin. Until 1865, St Andrews was a chapelry to Bringhurst, a small village to the west of Great Easton, which had the mother church. Great Easton gained parish status in that year. Oddly though, it's had a burial ground since 1349. Most interments took place at Bringhurst, but a burial ground here was a matter of need rather than want. You see, with the Black Death spreading at the time, Bringhurst's graveyard was becoming full, forcing the Bishop of Lincoln to grant a licence for a new one at Great Easton. St Andrew's Church is part of the Six Saints Circa Holt parish. When it's floodlit at night, this provides a strong focal point for the village. The northern side of its churchyard is often a carpet of primroses in the spring. There's a service held every Sunday in this church, with a communion service most Wednesdays too. It can seat around 140 people, although additional seating can be arranged by contacting the church wardens. Close to the church is one of Great Easton's village greens. By definition, it has at least 3 of these. On this one is a water pump next to a bench where it's possible to rest and take in the rural tranquility. You get some panoramic views towards Rockingham Castle up here. Well, the view from up here isn't quite as magnificent as I was led to believe, but it's still pretty good. Here we go. Here's the view from the green, looking south towards Rockingham Castle, which is somewhere over there behind all those buildings and stuff. Now, speaking of those buildings, a couple of these around the green are of note, including that one. Let's check out what this is. This intimate enclosed green is surrounded by a clutch of gorgeous houses, and several of them are Grade 2 listed. One of them used to be a pub. Today, known simply as number 6 Church Bank, it was called the Crown Inn. This dates from the 1500s and is one of the buildings within the Great Easton Conservation Area that still contains evidence of an original crook frame structure. It served the village as the Crown Inn from 1753 to 1909. Also on the edge of the green is a big house with a clock on its front facade. This is number 1 Church Bank, and it's alternatively known as the 1881 Clock House. This was the former home of the village clockmaker, Tom Fox. The original workshop where the man himself made them still adjoins the house to this day. Tom Fox made grandfather clocks and undertook clock repairs, whilst his brother worked as a blacksmith in a forge that was behind the house. After an about turn at the green, we've made our way to the High Street. Next, we've got Great Easton Village Hall. This building has had a few uses in its time. Originally, it was a hay wagon shed used by the farmer Tom Mould, he of the family we mentioned earlier. In 1933, he sold it to the Ancient Order of Oddfellows, and so this became their meeting place in Great Easton. In 1954, it was leased and subsequently purchased from the Oddfellows by the parish council and has served as the village hall to this day. The hall was extended in 1982 and 83, and its corrugated roof was replaced in 1987. When this was Tom Mould's hay wagon shed, the roof would have been thatched. The hall is where local residents have celebrated major local and national events, like royal jubilees and coronations. In 2003, the hall became a temporary workshop thanks to some local interest in the village from a well-known and well-loved TV programme. The building and the field behind it were the hub for an archaeological team, Channel 4's Time Team. Behind the village hall is a big open field known as the Paddock, or Brook Lane Paddock. In 2003, Time Team dug that field up as part of an archaeological project. They called it the Big Dig. They discovered a significant amount of Saxo-Norman pottery. Their findings revealed that the land was open space containing plot boundaries to the rear of a street frontage. That indicates that the village was already well established by the 11th century. No houses remain from that time. The earliest survivors are from the 1500s. In around 1620, most of Great Easton was rebuilt. Often referred to as the Great Rebuilding, this 17th century period brought the local vernacular architecture we still see today. The strong character and quality of craftsmanship is reflected by the high number of listed buildings in the village. That must have been great for the residents of Great Easton to meet the Time Team, Tony Robinson et al. Fantastic. Well, I'm not about Tony Robinson, but I've got a cunning plan, and that is to head down towards the shop next, or what used to be the shop. I'm led to believe it's no longer a shop anymore. Let's find out. Now to head down the high street towards two more little greens. They are two triangles of grass, one which features the War Memorial in the south and the other at the point where the high street meets Church Bank. That one features the Grade 2 listed red telephone box at its apex. There's far more than just greens down here. You can see two chapels marked on this. Only one still stands. Two more pubs are marked as well, but only one still trades. Loads of other buildings down here have stories to tell too. Great Easton no longer has a general store and post office. Both were based in this building on the High Street until September 2023. Since its closure, a new farm shop has been opened. That's located at Rectory Farm, but it's still too early to see the impact of that new business on the village. Although the Church of St Andrew has been a dominant feature of the village skyline for centuries, Great Easton was something of a hotbed for nonconformism, or at least it was from the late 17th century. By 1730, two dwelling houses held licences as nonconformist meeting places. As early as 1807, houses in the village were licensed as meeting places for Wesleyans. Later there were chapels, two of them, but only one still stands. That would be this. In 1857, this Wesleyan chapel was built, next to what used to be an old pinfold. This was used for worship until the 31st of August 1986. After its closure it was sold, and it's now a private house. You'll note it's made of brick, rather unusual given all the ironstone around here. This was made using bricks from a works on Caldecott Road, which produced them from 1850 onwards. Well, it would appear the old shop is actually still in use. It looks like a cafe now. It's got some seating out the front there. I didn't ask anybody if it is a cafe, but it certainly looks like one now. It's good to see that it's got a new use anyway. Not a village shop though. Now, we've made our way to another green, and in front of that green we have this building here. Now this was also a shop at one time. What did this sell, do you think? Where the High Street meets Crossbank, we find this house. This is number 16 Crossbank, a Grade 2 listed former butcher's shop. It was run by L.C. Ellingworth, the local butcher. Hidden behind it is a former slaughterhouse. Together, these two played an important part in village life. Now we're at the other green we spoke about a moment ago, the one with the War Memorial on it. Great Easton is not a thankful village. It lost a number of men in both world wars. In October 1920, this cross, made of Clipsham stone, was erected to memorialise those who fell in World War I. Some of the homes around the village that these men left behind to go to war now carry commemorative plaques. They were erected as part of World War I's centenary commemorations between 2014 and 2018. Here we have an attractive terrace of two-storey ironstone cottages. In this terrace is number 9 Cross Bank, which has a wide archway with double gates leading to the rear of the property. This archway may be evidence that the building was originally built as an alehouse. From the late 1700s until 1958, it was the Shoulder of Mutton pub. It never had a cellar or a bar, so the beer was kept on tap in barrels at the rear of the building, and customers were served from there. Okay, now we've reached Caldecott Road, and on the map it looks like down here there isn't a lot of much. But you'd be wrong. If you walk down here, you'll find something which is kind of hidden in plain sight. It's there, you just have to know it's there. So, what could it be? Let's see. Now let's see what happened to the other chapel, which no longer stands. To understand this one, we have to go back to 1798, when an independent chapel building was founded. No one is totally sure of where that stood, but it was rebuilt in 1830 on the road to Caldecott. By 1900, the replacement chapel was no longer in use. It was sold in 1919 and demolished soon afterwards. Its stones were then incorporated into the garden wall of the former manor house, Greylands, which today is number 1 Caldecott Road. Nothing remains of the chapel building now, but it did have a small burial ground. That can still be seen, but it could so easily be missed because it looks just like a pinfold. It's this walled enclosure on the corner of a new build cul-de-sac occupying what used to be another paddock. Back to the green, there are several listed buildings situated around this junction. One of them is the Sun Inn. This is now a gastropub which attracts custom from a wide area, many of whom travel by car. This has been a pub for several centuries. The first recorded landlord of the premises was in 1753, although the present building has had 19th and 20th century additions. As we learned earlier, Great Easton once had 6 public houses. We've now covered 4 of them. Number 5 is coming up shortly. Lots of lovely buildings here in Great Easton, aren't there? And sometimes the most historic ones aren't the obvious ones. I'm talking here particularly about an old factory, which we'll see in a moment. Before we get to that though, we have to discuss another building which is kind of, again, hidden in plain sight. It's on Banbury Lane, which is this little street here. It's a little cul-de-sac off the road through Great Easton. And number 2 is hiding behind that tree. What do you think this could have been in a past life? I'll tell you. Leading off Cross Bank at this point is Banbury Lane. It was formerly known as School Lane, and the reason why can be found at number 2. This is a 2-storey ironstone cottage of 17th century origin, although it has some later brick additions. Prior to the opening of a board school at Bringhurst in 1874, village children were taught in this very building. This was sold off in 1924, at which point the walls were built up in brick and the roof was raised. It then became a reading room until around 1945. Just after Banbury Lane on Cross Bank, you'll see this building. It's number 19. It was originally a farm building, as you can likely tell from the exterior. But from 1908 until 1963, this had another purpose. It's where a major local business was based, Moore and Haddon's Corset Makers. Corset making in Great Easton goes back much further than 1908. The 1851 census recorded 14 people in Great Easton who were corset manufacturers. 10 years later, William Haddon appears in the records as a corset and stay maker who employed 1 man, 1 boy and 40 women. We already know that corsets were made in other local villages, like Caldecott for example, just over the Rutland border. It seems it was a prominent local industry, so it's no wonder that Moore and Haddon took the opportunity to convert this old farm building into a factory. It's known that Moore and Haddon manufactured corsets in Great Easton for around 120 years in total, until this building eventually closed. It's now a private dwelling, but it still bears a nameplate on its wall, preserving its history of garment making. It's called the Old Corset Factory. Okay, we're crossing a bridge now. There's a brook below us. Again, not much water in that, just like the one we saw just up the road in Caldecott. So yeah, not much water around at the moment. Now then, there's another green, yet another green to see next, and the building which is next to it is also of interest to us. Let's check this out. Great Easton had lots of other businesses and trades at one time. In addition to a raft of former shops, there were a lot of cottage industries. There were once 2 blacksmiths, 2 wheelwrights, 2 tailors, a surgeon, a stonemason, 5 shoemakers and a cooper. There was also, unusually, a ketchup maker. Mushroom ketchup was made by the Ashby family at Bybrook House from the 1840s to around 1900. I would include a picture of the stuff, but honestly it looks revolting. I much prefer tomato ketchup myself. Great Easton also had bakers. The triangular green at the junction of Barnsdale and Brook Lane is where you find an old bakehouse. It was once 2 cottages, but one was demolished and a taller Victorian stone addition was built onto the one that remained. The date stone to this addition says 1879. The stone also contains the initials JC for John Culpin, who was the baker. This property is located at a prominent junction and makes a positive contribution to the conservation area. This junction is very picturesque, isn't it? Again, there are lots of listed buildings in this part of the village, including this thatched number, 8 Barnsdale. Now in residential use, this was pub number 5. It served as the King's Head Inn from 1818 until 1914, when it then became a shop. So that's 5 of the former pubs. Now as far as the 6th one goes, I have absolutely no idea where it was or what it was called. I searched for ages trying to pin it down, but no luck. In any event, the former King's Head stands almost at the edge of the conservation area boundary, but there is at least one more notable house that falls within it. Come with me to Barnsdale House, which looks a little out of place compared to these ironstone dwellings. Barnsdale House, which is set back from the road in its garden, is a distinctively early 19th century square building with a fine ashlar frontage facing outwards along the road looking towards Bringhurst. This was the home of the local doctor for over 100 years. So that's Great Easton, everybody. A great little Leicestershire village and full of rural character that can be seen at literally every turn. Let's continue through this lovely countryside by taking on the next village over to the west. See you for more Harborough tomorrow. Welcome back to Harborough again, everybody. Now, you may have been a little bit surprised in yesterday's episode that we didn't see a school, given how big Great Easton is. Well, Great Easton's children have to come to the next village over. Between the 2 villages, you find a school, and that's where we're going to start this very short episode, because apart from the school, the only thing of note really is the church in the village itself. This is Bringhurst. Bringhurst, wooded hill of briniest people. Today we continue with the district of Harborough with the beautiful little village of Bringhurst, and little is a very apt term for this one. Bordering Northamptonshire to the south and within shouting distance of Rutland, this is a village with a long, long history. It lies within an agricultural landscape with the River Welland to the south. Bringhurst is believed to be among the earliest ever Anglo-Saxon settlements, not just in Leicestershire, but in the entire country. It shares a lot of history with Great Easton, but also with the other local villages too. Close to Bringhurst are Drayton and Nevill Holt. Though all three are separate parishes, they work together and they're represented by the same parish meeting. Of the three, it's Bringhurst that commands the most religiously important building. At the centre of the place is a near circular churchyard, in which stands St Nicholas's Church with a squat tower dating back to 1180. Around that are houses and cottages, principally of ironstone, with either thatched roofs or stone slates, either from Collyweston or Weldon. The entrance to the village court is marked by a grass triangle with a red telephone box. Behind the triangle to the north are the traditional buildings of Manor Farm. Bringhurst also contains a school, although that's on the road out of the place between it and Great Easton. It's an important building though, being the only school the two villages have. The location of Bringhurst on a hill and the prominence of its church tower means you can see this place from afar. Well, that's all well and good, but it's always different when you're able to see things up close and personal. It's usually better too. Let's do that here and see if it is. So here we have Bringhurst as it was in 1900. This has never been a massive parish and the village has always been pretty small, but this bit of the Leicestershire countryside defies its apparently lowly status. You can split this one up into two distinct areas. First of all, it can be defined as a clustered village even though it's actually on a dead end. That's because literally everything sits around the church, which defines the centre of it all. Then, to the north, there's a lane that stretches up to the Great Eastern Road, and on that road you have the school, which is shared between Bringhurst and its much larger neighbour. Aside from those, it's all farmland. Let's zoom in and take a closer look. So here you can clearly see those two areas better. We'll get things started by taking a look at the school, which today is still in its isolated position away from everything else. Then we'll drive into the village before walking to the church. We'll pass practically everything else on the way. So this is the school, Bringhurst Primary, which is part of the David Ross Education Trust. This was built in 1875, and earlier this year it celebrated its 150th birthday with a huge celebration. It took the form of an afternoon fete held within the school grounds. The sun-soaked event welcomed former pupils, teachers, families and friends who joined the current children. As part of the festivities, the school even had a visit from the local Welland Valley Highlands herd. There's around 150 pupils who attend this school. Before it existed, Bringhurst, as far as I'm aware, never had an earlier school. Children from Great Easton attend this one today. Beforehand, they were taught in that tiny building on Banbury Lane that we learned about yesterday. Although it's positioned in a relatively isolated spot, the school has had a few problems with traffic. In 2010, some long-standing road safety fears were highlighted by a 6-car crash outside the school gates. Let's hope there's no accidents here. Let's have a drive down into the village now, which takes next to no time at all. See you shortly at the village green, where we'll encounter the red telephone box and a collection of adorable cottages, some with thatched roofs. Okay, we have made our way into Bringhurst village, and as you can see from this sign on the small green that has a phone box, it's a no-through road. And there's not really much to this. From this green you'll walk for about, I don't know, 2-3 minutes, and then you're at the church. And that's really the only other landmark in this place. So let's make our way to the church and see what it's got. This village might be tiny, but the significance of its church far outweighs the otherwise small stature of the place. This is St Nicholas's Church, a Grade 2 listed building made up of a chancel, a nave, a clerestory, north and south aisles and a tower. Although the tower is ancient, it's not the oldest part of this church. That honour rests with the north arcade, dating from the late Norman period. Although a definitive date for it can't easily be ascertained, it's definitely older than the tower. 1150 is often thrown around. The tower is from 1180. The south aisle dates from around 1200 and the chancel has been altered many times, most recently during a Ewan Christian restoration in 1862. The chancel bears the royal coat of arms of George III, dating from 1814. The tower used to have bells, but alas, no longer. They were removed in 1970. One has to wonder what Nicholas Pevsner would have made of this church if Ewan Christian hadn't restored it. Pevsner described this church in his work as drab, not a term that usually gets bandied about when Christian is involved. I guess he couldn't please everyone. This church does not have any grand monuments or fabric of architectural interest, but still it remains a pleasantly proportioned building set in the middle of the village itself. There are no facilities otherwise in the village, and so this church is really all that Bringhurst has to its name. But what all of that doesn't tell you is exactly how long Bringhurst has been a major religious centre. Since it's sited on a hill, the likelihood is that this village was the site of an Iron Age hill fort. It probably passed the Romans by, but the Saxons were definitely once here. They had a settlement here in the 6th century, perched high on the hill that overlooks the Wellands floodplain. They had a church of their own too, which is believed to have sat here where St Nicholas's is today. Nothing remains of that building now. Bringhurst was later held by Peterborough Abbey, and at the time of the conquest it's thought that the Norman abbot of Peterborough had the Saxon church pulled down to be replaced with a new one. The north arcade and the tower, of course, still remain from those days. Okay, so as you can tell from that last shot there, we are at the end of the lane. You can go no further in your car. You can on foot because there's a footpath at the end of Bringhurst here, and that'll take you out into this lovely countryside. There is a view over there, it's kind of obscured by trees. The footpath in question is the Jurassic Way. You're 2 miles away from Cottingham here. Not the one in East Yorkshire, obviously, but there is another Cottingham down here. So, for us, we are going to make our way back to the car again, which means passing the church and checking out the rest of Bringhurst. There's not a lot to it. To fill the rest of this episode, we'll take a walk up from the church to the cemetery, which occupies a separate plot of land between the village green and the school. If you were looking closely, you might even have spotted that on our drive down. As we learned a moment ago, the village antedates the Norman conquest and was one of the first Anglo-Saxon settlements of Britain. Peterborough Abbey acquired Bringhurst in around 700 AD, so think the historical experts on such matters. The land was given by Ethelred of Mercia to Medeshamsted Abbey at about that time. Medeshamsted, of course, was the old name for Peterborough. In addition, a confirmatory charter from the time of Edward the Confessor speaks of a church here. Even though this village is ancient, you won't find an entry for it in the Domesday Book, which is very surprising. The book does, though, include information about it. You have to read the entry for Great Easton instead, which was known as Eston back then. That would imply that at that time Great Easton had more importance than this older village on the hilltop. This makes a bit of sense. By the 13th century, most villages were growing in population, but Bringhurst wasn't. And why? Well, it was badly sited. Hilltops weren't easy to expand upon. The name of the village is interesting. Nobody knows what this place was called in Saxon times. The earliest known mentions of it refer to the place as Brunninghurst. Other variations include Bringhurst, Bringhurst, Bringhast, and Bringhaste. Bringhurst comes from the personal name Bryny, derived from the Old English word brine. That means fire or flame. Hurst means wooded hill in Old English, which in turn is related to the word Hurst or Horst in Old High German. Okay, so we've made it to this little burial ground. Let's go inside. It's fairly big, this, considering Bringhurst is so small. You see, it's quite sizable. Plenty of space though in here still. There's still quite a bit on this side here for future burials. Let's check this out to finish with and we'll move on to the next one. We've made it to the cemetery. This is on the edge of Bringhurst village on the road towards Great Easton. The earliest burial in here dates from 1896. It appears to still be in use. Burials in Bringhurst are nothing new though, especially when the Black Death was sweeping the area in the 1340s. Bringhurst's burial ground quickly became full because of that. We have no idea where those burials are though, because there are no records of them. That's the difference with this cemetery. This provides us with a visual representation of who once lived in this ancient village. With Bringhurst in the books, it's time we made for the next one, and we don't have to go very far. Just to the northwest is a beautiful little settlement based around a gorgeous village green with one of the smallest churches in Leicestershire. That's got to be worth coming back for tomorrow, right? See you later. Welcome back to Harborough again, folks. Now, yesterday we saw a very small village in Bringhurst, didn't we? Well, this one is small too, but it's a little bigger. You might have been able to see this actually from the cemetery in Bringhurst at the end of that video. Well, now we're actually in it. This has, apparently, the smallest church in Leicestershire. Let's check it out. This is Drayton. Drayton, Portage Farm. Today on TVI we have the parish of Drayton, located about 6.5 miles northeast of Market Harborough in the Welland Valley. This is certainly not the largest village in Leicestershire, but it's small things that make this place notable. The Church of St James in Drayton is one of the smallest churches in England. It sits on the village green and could so easily be mistaken for a house if you're just passing through. It's worth a look, but Drayton is far from being a one-trick pony. There are other things to this one too. Have you ever been to a place that seems like it came out of a history book? Well, Drayton could well be one of those places. This whole village is rich in history, which is eloquently manifested in its architecture and traditions. The church is an emblematic example. The village's architectural heritage, with its ironstone houses and thatched cottages, speaks of a past as distant as it is fascinating. Drayton not only offers a window into history, but also an example of how small communities keep their cultural heritage alive over time. Early Drayton grew up around the green, which is oval-shaped. West of the green is the impressive Drayton House. That's a tall red brick structure built in 1851 for Brian Ward, a tenant of the Rockingham estate. South of the road to Great Easton is Manor House Farm, which is alternatively known as College Farm. That was built in the 1870s for a relative of Lord Sons, whose arms it carries. Its cart shed was once a large house occupied by the Watson family. Elsewhere, Drayton's old pub, the Plough Inn, offers another glimpse back in time, as do the old maltings just up the street. We've got more than you might think to cover here, so let's get walking. So here we have Drayton Parish as it was in 1900. The village itself is in the east of the boundaries, whilst to the west you can see a lot of farmland. In the extreme west of the parish, Drayton had a brickworks and a series of quarries. The remains of those industries are now just scars on the landscape. In fact, if you drive along the Medbourne road, you can see those remains quite clearly. It's all private land though, so we won't be heading towards those. Running across the parish there used to be a railway line. That wasn't terribly relevant to Drayton, seeing as there was never a station here. We'll talk more about that line when we get to Medbourne, which had the nearest station to this village. And speaking of the village, it's a pretty simple little place, this one. It's all based around a central green. Since the 12th century, that green has held a religious building. Drayton had a Wesleyan chapel too, and a pub called the Plough. On this map, all three are clearly marked. Let's go and see them. So let's get started with the pub, or should I say, former pub. Here we have the old Plough, a stone building which is partly thatched. The older portions of this building probably date from the 17th century, although definitively dating this one is difficult. These days, the old pub is known as Plough Cottage. When it was an inn, there were several buildings here that made up a complex. There were 2 cottages and a barn, which have now been thoughtfully integrated to create an impressive and comfortable home. The plot it occupies stretches way further back than you'd initially believe. Plough Cottage still has lots of its original features, including exposed beams, stone walls, working inglenook fireplaces, ledged and braced latch doors, and window seats. Outside, there's an extensive lawn. Let's have a look in the phone box, and in much the same way as in Bringhurst, this one holds the defib machine, but it's also got a little book exchange in it. So let's have a look. It's a very modest one, just 2 shelves, but there we go. And apparently they only accept paperback novels here. That's not fair. That's not fair. I like a good hardback. I don't know about you guys. Literally a few paces up the street, we come to another house that used to be something else. This is the Maltings Barn. The name is a little misleading because it was never both things at the same time. It was originally a barn, but later it became Maltings. It dates back to the early 1800s. As we know, certain areas of Leicestershire were pretty handy when it came to malting, and given the copious amount of farmland around here, it makes perfect sense for Drayton to have had a building dedicated to it. No longer used as such though, it's a house now, and Grade 2 listed to boot. The Maltings is one of the oldest residences in the village. Most of the oldest are all located around the green, made generally of ironstone. Drayton though isn't all about ancient ironstone like Great Easton was. On the contrary actually, it has properties from many different periods. The village contains several 19th century brick cottages, including a row dated 1870. It seems the brickworks in the west of the parish were put to good use. There are 2 pairs of council houses on Great Eastern Road, which were built after World War I, and there are 3 pairs on the road to Nevill Holt, built in 1950. Also on the road to Easton, we have that old chapel, still standing but long since disused by worshippers. This was used by the Wesleyans and was built of stone at an unknown date, despite the fact there's a date stone on the wall at the front. You can't read it, it's far too worn away. Without a doubt though, this was in place before 1873. Records state that in that year, this chapel had accommodation for 94 people. This rose to 140 in 1881, but then fell again for some reason thereafter to between 70 and 75. Until 1940, the chapel measured 28 feet by 16. The pews were raised from the floor in a gallery form. You can imagine them in almost the same way as desks were in old schools. Speaking of schools, this had a school room at one time, measuring 18 feet by 16. Okay, once you get to the chapel, the road then runs off back towards Bringhurst, and it's really just modern housing. Well, it is on the right hand side anyway. There's a couple of older ones on the left. There's College Farm there. College Farm. Now, I wonder if College Farm has got anything to do with this field, because as I was coming around the bend there and looking at the chapel, I noticed this field. Now, this has got an amazing set of earthworks in it. They are very, very pronounced. They're very tall. So I wonder whether College Farm has got anything to do with these. My other sort of educated guess could be something to do with the manor house, because over there is Manor Farm or Manor Farm House, something like that. I saw it on a nameplate, so I wonder if these are maybe manorial buildings that stood here. But whatever was here, these are absolutely incredible earthworks. Some of the highest, tallest I think I've ever seen in Leicestershire. Amazing. Now let's head back, because there's not much point going this way because we know what's down there. It's Bringhurst. If we head this way, we'll find a footpath that will take us towards Drayton House and the village hall. Let's turn around now to find a path. It will take us to the green on which Drayton's conservation area is based. Visually, it's the most dominant part of the village. Everything else of note is either on or around it, including the huge Drayton House. Drayton House is perhaps the most impressive dwelling the village has. Located west of the green, Drayton House is a tall, red brick structure built between 1851 and 52 for Brian Ward, a tenant of the Rockingham Castle estate. And that's really all I found out about either Brian Ward or the house he lived in. A bit of digging, though, revealed that Ward was a prominent name across the area between Leicestershire and Northamptonshire. Most seem to have been farmers, and it feels like there's more yet to discover. Next, we have the village hall. This is a wooden structure which was opened in 1925 originally, although it was renovated in 2019 after falling into disrepair. The plans for this building go back to 1924. They were discovered by a man called Neil Killip when he was clearing out his loft whilst preparing to move house. The documents describe its construction by Scots of Thrapston. The documents go on to say that villagers from Drayton met in 1924 with the aim of raising funds to build a parish hall for use as a reading room, a games room, and as a space for dances, whist drives and concerts. James Scott, the great-grandfather of the company's current managing director, submitted a tender for its construction at a cost of £271. That's the equivalent to around £20,000 today. Fundraising events included a grand draw, with prizes including a ton of coal, a bicycle, and a live pig. Once construction was complete, the hall was fitted out with electric light, a collapsible stage, and a second-hand piano. Building this village hall was one of the first ever jobs for Scots of Thrapston, who have since evolved. After World War I, they employed skilled cabinet makers to help construct timber agricultural buildings, and the business grew from there. They now make timber outbuildings, garages, equestrian buildings, and summer houses, to name just a few other things they're known for today. Okay, so we haven't really walked all that far at all, and we're nearly at the end of this episode. Behind me there you can see the church here in Drayton. Now apparently this is the smallest church in Leicestershire. I must admit it is a little bit on the diddy side. Let's have a look at it. Now we come to the Church of St James, which stands on the central green. It's a Grade 2 listed building, and it's held that status since December 1966. This is the smallest consecrated church in Leicestershire, according to some sources. It's also among the smallest in the entire country. It's made up of a single room, built of stone and roofed with slate. It stands on the site of a former chapel which fell out of religious use in the 18th century and was converted into a bakehouse by 1794. That original building might well have been 12th century in origin. Evidence for that comes in the form of a large semicircular internal arch. In 1878, George Lewis Watson of Rockingham Castle bought the building and proceeded to remodel it throughout 1878 and 1879 into a mission church. It continued as a chapel of Easton-Bringhurst, which possessed the Mother Church of St James. Speaking of other places that controlled things in Drayton, that brings us to something rather interesting I discovered about this parish. Drayton was one of the only parts of the former manor of Easton that was never controlled by Peterborough Abbey. Another was the lost medieval village of Prestgrave to the north. More on that in a moment. Okay, so in the church here we've got a war memorial, but it's not just for Drayton, it's also for Bringhurst too. There you go, you can see the names of 6 men there who were lost in World War I. Now, this church, it really is as small as I've made it out to be. There are just 16 chairs in here, so that tells you how many people can get in this thing. I suppose you could put another row of chairs, or maybe 2 rows of chairs there to make it 20 or 24, but you're not going to get very many more people in here, to be honest with you. So we'll head out of the church and back up to the car, and that is our walk around Drayton. Lovely little place this. North of Drayton is the site of the lost medieval village of Prestgrave, and not much is known about this one. It was for sure though the site of multi-period occupation. I'm talking Iron Age, Roman and Anglo-Saxon. Field walking and excavation in the past have uncovered a late Iron Age occupation site indicated by pottery finds. A Roman villa site is indicated by building remains, tessellated floors and roof and flue tiles, whilst pottery evidence suggests a late 3rd century AD date. However, not all of the site has been explored. Some historians reckon the site may spread northwards into Nevill Holt, but this is something nobody yet knows for sure. There are barely any earthwork remains. To the untrained eye, Prestgrave simply does not exist anymore. So, Drayton is another tiny little village that's full of character. You could say that for many of these Harborough villages, they never seem to disappoint. The next one in this series is a little different. It's not every day you find a village with an opera house, but come back tomorrow and you'll see one. Welcome back to Harborough again, everybody. Now, here's another very small place, but this has got a big history. It's also got a couple of massive buildings as well. Now, do you remember a couple of days ago when we were in Bringhurst and we were in the cemetery at the very end of that video? I could see the biggest building in this place from that cemetery because this is on a hilltop. You can see it for miles and miles around if you know where to look. This is the beautiful little village of Nevill Holt. Nevill Holt, Thomas Neville's wood. Now here's an unusual place if ever there was one. We're used to seeing villages on this channel, it's what we do after all. Nevill Holt is a village, but definitely unlike the vast majority. Come to this place and you'll find a magnificent church. That's normal. What's not normal is what's around it. Nevill Holt's history spans centuries, from its origins with the Palmer family in the 1400s to the influential Nevill family, who gave their name to not just the village, but to the massive house right in the middle of it. That house is called Nevill Holt Hall. The Nevilles were notable recusants during the 16th and 17th centuries, enduring political upheaval and heavy fines. Among their number was Anne Nevill, born at the house in 1605. Anne would become the abbess of Pontoise near Paris. The estate was later owned by the Cunard family. The Cunards were wealthy shipping magnates connected to Canada. The hall would later become a prep school, and it stayed that way for several decades of the 20th century before it was forced to close thanks to a scandal that saw dire consequences for two of its teachers. It closed as a school in 1998, but 2 years later, David Ross stepped in. He transformed it into a venue for the arts, including a custom-built opera theatre. Now, every year, the Opera House hosts something called the Nevill Holt Opera Festival, which attracts people from far and wide. The hall, the Opera House and the church form the core of the village here. There are other houses, but none of them can hold a candle to those buildings. Let's check them out. This is Nevill Holt as it was in 1900. One look at this old map and straight away you have a pretty accurate picture of the place. Nevill Holt is a prestigious estate centred on a massive hall. Since 1900, there have been very few changes to this layout. Nevill Holt was first recorded as Holt, meaning a wood. Nevill would come later. Originally known as Holt Hall, the mansion in the middle of this dates from the 14th century, incorporating many styles of architecture from medieval times onwards. The main alterations here have been with the hall itself and not its surroundings. Essentially, the hall, the church and the buildings associated with them both are still as they were, save for the stable block, which has seen a raft of changes as the hall's use has altered itself. Nevill Holt as a village can be defined as this. The centre of the place is all based around a clutch of buildings that are contiguous with Nevill Holt Hall. These include the Church of St Mary and an opera house. The latter of those isn't marked on this map because it's within the old stable block. Let's have a look at the church to start with. Dedicated to St Mary, this dates largely from the 13th century, but it has had many later perpendicular features added. It was restored in 1865 to designs by the architects Goddard and Son, and then it was restored again in 1878. St Mary's is unlike most other churches. We can admire its Victorian architecture from the outside with no problem, but we can't get inside this one. You see, this is a closed church because it's currently in private ownership. As such, the church, churchyard and the burials associated with them are protected by a Ministry of Justice dispensing order issued under Section 78 of the Church of England's Mission and Pastoral Measure in 2011. So, with not much more that we can really do with this church, our attention shifts to the hall this is associated with. Nevill Holt Hall sits on a small hilltop at the centre of the village. It's a Grade 1 listed building, originally constructed before 1300. And you can tell this is a private church as well because there's no entrance from the road. It's surrounded by a wall, this churchyard, on all sides. So yeah, it's not the kind of church we can actually have a look at. And the same kind of goes for the hall as well because it's surrounded by high walls and things like that. So this might be interesting to try and film. You can see parts of the hall if you know where to stand, and luckily I do. Exactly when is open to debate, but experts think it might have been as early as the 12th century when the local woodland, or the Holt, was cleared. Nobody has ever managed to ascertain if there are any 12th century remains here. The oldest known parts of this building go back to the middle of the 1400s. For example, the stone porch and the oriel window were built in 1474. In the early years, the estate was in the possession of the Kirby or Kirkby family. By 1444, Thomas Palmer had acquired the property and built up a large estate, having purchased lands in Holt-Medbourne, Drayton and other villages close by. He laid out a large park, most likely for hunting purposes, and made additions to the hall. One of those was to include a church, although it's not clear whether or not that building was related in any way to St Mary's, seeing as that predates Palmer's time. In any event, in 1457, his eldest daughter Catherine married William Nevill from a family at Rolleston in Nottinghamshire. William Nevill seems to have been unrelated to Robert de Nevill, the lord of the manor in the 1120s. If the two were connected, it must have been very distantly. In any event, William was the first in a line of Nevilles spanning almost 400 years. Yes, I told you, I said I knew where to stand, and it's very easy to do this actually. There's a public footpath that runs all the way around the hall. If you basically turn left at the stable block, which is that over there, the footpath then loops around this very deep ha-ha, and you get this magnificent view of Nevill Holt Hall. I tell you what, the people that live there right now, they must have a very good view themselves, because this is on top of a hill, as I said at the beginning of this episode, and this is the view into the valley below. You can see for miles here, and it's a really nice day today too, so on a day like this, the view is spectacular. Fabulous, isn't it? William and Catherine Nevill were followed at Holt by their son Thomas. His parents died when he was a minor, so he was raised by another family. He's believed to have fought for King Henry VIII in his Scottish campaigns and was knighted as a result. Arise, Sir Thomas. He became an important landowner in Leicestershire and fulfilled several duties such as Justice of the Peace and High Sheriff of the county. He purchased further lands in the area and carried out extensive additions to the hall. Sir Thomas had a daughter, Mary, but also an illegitimate son, Humphrey Blunt, to whom he left the estate on his death. Little is known about Humphrey, but he used the surname Nevill. He died in 1590 and the estate passed to Mary. Mary Nevill married Thomas Smythe, who agreed to change his surname to Nevill, and on the death of Humphrey, the property passed to their son, Sir Thomas Nevill Jr. It's believed that one of these Thomases gave their surname Nevill to Holt, transforming it into the modern name. Many notable historical figures have lived in or have been born in this building since then. The one that sticks out straight away is the French abbess Anne Nevill, born here in 1605. Her parents were Lady Mary Sackville and Sir Henry Nevill, the son of Sir Thomas Jr. Henry was a renowned soldier on the Royalist side in the English Civil War. Taken prisoner at the Battle of Naseby, he was imprisoned for 6 months and the estate was confiscated by Parliament. Henry was forced to pay a fine of £6,000 to recover the property. The Nevilles would eventually disappear from the local scene, but not before they'd firmly established the name of the hall and that of the village. No longer simply Holt, the prefix Nevill was here to stay, despite what's become of the building since they left. So as you've probably gathered, I have moved away from where I was standing because there's only so many shots you can take of the hall from that vantage point before it gets a little bit boring. And there's more to see here in Nevill Holt. So I haven't finished talking about the hall and its history, but as I finish that off, I'll give you sort of a flavour of what else is here in Nevill Holt, because to be honest with you, there's more than just the hall and the church, to be honest. There's a lot of good scenery. In the late 19th century, the hall and its estate was owned by the Cunard family, who made their vast fortune from shipping. In 1896, the hall was the birthplace of the writer, anti-racism and anti-fascism activist, publisher and society hostess Nancy Cunard. In 1919, the hall was bought by the Reverend C.A.C. Bolker and became a preparatory school. That was run by the Phillips family from 1928 onwards and acted as an IAPS boarding school. IAPS standing for Independent Association of Prep Schools. It stayed that way until 1998 and could still have been a school today if the details of a child sexual abuse scandal at it had never come to light. That saw one teacher convicted and another commit suicide shortly after police arrived with an arrest warrant. It was the hall's darkest time. 2 years later, the hall was bought and restored by David Ross, the man who co-founded the successful telecoms company, the Carphone Warehouse. Ross had visited the hall when it was a prep school because a friend of his at Uppingham School had once attended it. Ross made several changes to the hall, but he didn't stop at the main building. These days, Nevill Holt Hall has other structures around it, which make it stand out from other country houses. The largest and most unusual of these is a theatre. On maps, it's referred to as the Opera House. Okay, so what we've done, we've walked all the way around the hall and halfway around it again to get back to this point here in front of the church. But I've done that purposely because there's one thing we haven't yet spoken about, and that would be the building you can see behind me there with the clock on it. That is the old stable block, and these days it's also an opera house. And this is the Opera House. Built by Ross as a 350-seat theatre, this is located within what used to be the hall's 17th century former stable yard. Remember, the hall used to be a school, so the stable yard area is no stranger to seeing unusual things. Before this existed, there was a science lab here. That's not all. It's also seen things like classrooms, a carpentry workshop, an indoor swimming pool, and, get this, even a boxing ring. The Opera House easily trumps all of those, though. It's since been extended to a capacity of 400 from its original 350, thanks to the architect's Witherford Watson Mann, opening anew in 2018. Now, in the summer, the Opera House is well used. It becomes the centre of the estate when it hosts the annual Nevill Holt Opera Festival. The 2021 festival was held in the open air due to COVID-19 restrictions. The two operas performed that year were La Traviata and Don Giovanni. The Opera House won the 2019 Reba National Award and made the shortlist for the 2019 Sterling Prize for Excellence in Architecture. The festival is about more than just opera. It's about the broader spectrum of arts and culture, and it's held here every June. Visitors can enjoy outstanding pieces of British sculpture in the gardens, including works by Anthony Gormley, Rachel Whiteread, Alan Jones and Mark Quinn. With panoramic views that look out over 3 counties, Nevill Holt's Opera Theatre is surrounded by bucolic private gardens designed by Chelsea Gold Medal winner Rupert Golby. It's all set against the stunning backdrop that is Nevill Holt Hall. Let's throw in a piece on Nancy Cunard while we're here. Born in the Hall in 1896, Nancy Cunard was a writer, heiress and political activist. Born into the British upper class, most of her life was dedicated to fighting racism and fascism. Her works made her one of the 20th century's most distinguished writers and artists, acting as a muse for such people as Aldous Huxley, Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, Man Ray and William Carlos Williams. Nancy's father was Sir H. Cunard, an heir to the Cunard Line shipping businesses. He was interested in polo and fox hunting, so you can see why the Hall would have been right up his street. Her mother was Maud Alice Burke, an American who often went by the name Emerald. Nancy was brought up on the estate at Nevill Holt until 1911, when her parents separated before moving to London with her mother. Her education was at various boarding schools, including time in France and Germany. It was a move to Paris in 1920 that kick-started her career as a writer. The French capital offered her copious amounts of modernism, surrealism and Dada. Much of her published poetry dates from this period. A brief relationship with Aldous Huxley influenced several of his novels. Indeed, Nancy was the model for Myra Viviash in Antic Hay in 1923 and for Lucy Tandermount in Point Counterpoint in 1928, the same year her publishing company, Hours Press, was founded. Cunard then began a relationship with Henry Crowder, an African-American jazz musician who was working in Paris. This led her to become an activist in matters concerning racial politics and civil rights in the US. In 1931, Hours Press published the pamphlet Black Man and White Ladyship, which was an attack on racist attitudes. In the mid-1930s, Cunard took an anti-fascist fight, writing about Mussolini's annexation of Ethiopia and the Spanish Civil War. It was in these texts where her prediction of another world war were written, referring to the events in Spain. Her stories about the suffering of Spanish refugees became the basis for a fundraising appeal in the Manchester Guardian. 1937 saw the publication of a series of pamphlets of war poetry, including the work of W. H. Auden, Tristan Tzara and Pablo Neruda. During World War II, Cunard worked to the point of physical exhaustion as a translator in London on behalf of the French resistance. Post-war, Cunard would rent a small house in the French village of La Mothe-Fenelon in the Dordogne Valley. By this time, her mental health was in serious decline and her physical health wasn't much better, worsened by alcoholism, poverty and self-destructive behaviour. This led to severe weight loss. Indeed, at the time of her death, Cunard was a mere 60 pounds. Her body was returned to England for cremation and then sent back to Paris. Her ashes rest in urn number 9016 at a cemetery in the capital. Now, you can walk around the rest of this estate by using public footpaths, therefore forming a loop around the Hall. Having done that myself, there's one more thing I want to cover on foot, these marvellous gates. These form the main entrance to the Hall, but they're a little more than just that. These are memorial gates. Together with the screen connected to them, they were built in 1950 of wrought iron with stone ashlar end piers and low walls. They have 2 panels on them, which record the names of the 30 old boys of Nevill Holt Preparatory School who died in World War II. To make our exit from the village, we're driving down the tree-lined avenue that leads to another set of iron gates on the western side of the Hall. These are much older, dating from 1880. If the memorial gates are the entrance to the Hall, you can think of these as the entrance to the entire estate. In fact, that's probably what they were designed to be. Right next to them there's a gate lodge. The tree-lined avenue would originally have been a coach drive leading up to the Hall. These days it's a public road and it'll take us to our next village. But hang on, there's something else to cover. To the north of the parish it's mainly farmland, and there are several farms up there. Here's one that everybody should know about. It's called Priory Farm because it sits on the remains of one. It was called Bradley Priory. We can't get to its site because it's private land, but we can talk about it a little. Bradley Priory was founded between 1220 and 1234. The first mention of it in any sort of record came in 1233, when Robert Bundy, alternatively known as Robert de Burnaby, was listed as its patron. It's thought that Robert might have been the founder of the priory. It was only very small, and as such it wasn't always granted its own prior. For example, it's known that John Penny served as both prior of Bradley when he was the abbot of Leicester Abbey. In 1535 there were only 2 canons here, and only a single child at the almonry. Bradley is known to have owned a windmill at Holt since it was founded, and gained the manor of Blaston in 1385. In the Vala Ecclesiasticus of 1535, the priory is recorded as owning land in Blaston, Slawston, Holt and Hollyoake, and had a total income of just £20. It was dissolved in 1536 and its site was granted to Humphrey Neville. The site today is occupied by Priory Farm and nothing remains of the buildings. That said, there are a minor collection of earthworks that show the former precinct boundaries. So that's Nevill Holt, a very historic little place which takes you all the way back to the medieval period. It's so interesting to see what it's become now. To end this week, we're off to another big village. Get ready for what is allegedly the most desirable place to live in all of Leicestershire. Welcome back to Harborough again, people. For the last time this week, I've got a very interesting village to wrap up the week with. Now, this one's got loads of stories and tales to tell, and the road I'm standing on right now has one of them. This used to lead to Nevill Holt, which we saw yesterday. It doesn't anymore, though. We're going to find out the reason why as we walk around Medbourne. Medbourne, Meadow Stream. To end this latest run in Harborough, we come to the most desirable place to live in all of Leicestershire. No, that's not personal opinion, that's genuinely how people have described the lovely village of Medbourne before now. Honestly, I don't think it's very far wide of the mark. From a property standpoint, estate agents do regard it as a very sought-after location. Mind you, the same could be said for anywhere in the Welland Valley, really. Medbourne is a small, tranquil village which is a 10-minute drive from Market Harborough. It's also only 15 minutes from Uppingham. Medbourne was a major settlement in Roman times. Because it lay on the Via Divana, the route between Chester and Colchester, it was an important stopping point for your average Roman legion. It became a market town, but since those times, things have scaled back a bit. The village still has its own shop, known as Medbourne Village Stores. There's a pub too called the Nevill Arms, the name of which is a direct reference to the Nevill Holt estate immediately to the east. It used to have a railway station too at one time, but that closed as long ago as 1916. The name Medbourne is Anglo-Saxon and simply means meadow stream. The name has been unchanged since it was recorded as such in the Domesday Book. The stream is still here. That and 2 of its tributaries form part of the parish boundaries to the north of the village. However, being so close to water, flooding was a concern historically. This, though, has been rectified now by way of some artificial channels straightening the course of the brook through the village. The last time Medbourne flooded was in the 1980s, so hopefully we'll have a dry walk here. Let's go. Here's Medbourne as it appeared on maps in 1900. This was just after the construction of the railway line that slices its way through the village, and so just before this map was produced, it would have looked very different here. You can see the route of the line here. Medbourne had a station at one time, but that's now gone. So too has the railway in fact, but its presence certainly shaped the modern village as we know it now. This isn't a railway village though, it's an old Roman market town. The population record for the village goes back to the Domesday Book when there were 22 workers and their families here. The highest population was of 580, recorded in 1861. It then fell to a low of 352 in 1931. It has since climbed back to 436 in 2004, and the modern population is almost 500. Let's start this walk in the north. Our first task is to get ourselves from this area here down to the village green, which is here. On the way, we'll pass a variety of things like the Old Crown Inn, which closed almost a century ago. This map doesn't tell you everything, as you're about to see. Let's kick things off with Old Holt Road. Now this is a dead end, but that wasn't always the case. It used to be the main road between Medbourne and Holt before the railway came along and sliced it into two pieces. The section of the line here was known as the Medbourne Curve. Whilst the majority of later building in Medbourne takes the form of infilling, these houses here at the top of Old Holt Road are slightly different. They stand on part of the old railway line. This purpose-built estate is called the Batters, a name which the locals use to refer to the line's old route. As we journey around the village on foot, we'll see exactly where the line was. It's no longer here because it was lifted some time ago, but the route of it is still clearly traceable on overhead maps. We'll also see how access to Holt was maintained, despite the obvious obstruction. Here we have Main Street, which, if followed southwards, leads down to the village green. Between here and there, we have a few landmarks to cover. This is Paget's Farm, a standout property at this northern end. It was built in the late 17th century and heightened in around 1800. A few doors away is a building that looks like an old chapel. Don't be fooled. This has never had any religious purpose. This is the old village hall. A plain red brick building, it was erected with money raised by public subscription in 1913. It was then renovated during the 1970s by grants and village fundraising and was converted into a set of offices after its village hall function was transferred to the old school in the centre of Medbourne. We'll come across that in a little while. Brick is a common building material in Medbourne, quite unlike many of the local villages around it. It indicates a considerable amount of 19th century construction, most of it dating from the latter half of that period. Now, one of the buildings you've just seen there is called Chapel Schoolhouse. It's this one, number 32. Now, that's interesting. So to see the house next door to this be called Chapel Schoolhouse is kind of making me question what I found. All along Main Street there are smaller stone houses dating from the 17th century. Most are or were single-storied with either half or full attic bedrooms. Some have been heightened to provide a more habitable upper floor. A great example of that comes in the form of the Old Crown Inn. The heightening process here saw the pitch of its roof be flattened and its old thatch disappear to be replaced with Welsh slate. This was a pub until the late 1920s. Today it's called Crown House because that's what it now is. Not far down the road from the old pub and the forge, the road splits into two pieces around a green. This is Springbank and it's where you find the local shop, Medbourne Village Stores. It also doubles as the post office too. The shop moved to this location in 1999 and its premises retains an original Victorian appearance. Before housing the modern shop and the post office, this was Warner's grocery shop and later became a butcher's. It's a left turn into Rectory Lane now, where there are two big buildings opposite each other. Both have Grade 2 listings. This is the old rectory. It dates mainly from 1830, but preserves at its northern end a crosswing from a former 17th century parsonage. There's also a later 18th century addition. And dead opposite is the Old Hall, which lies between Manor Road and Rectory Lane. This is similar in plan to another big house we'll see shortly called Dale Farm, but it's of an earlier date. Although it can't be accurately dated, it was probably built somewhere around the middle of the 17th century. So as you'll have gathered there, you can't see either of those buildings properly because of high walls and hedgerows. Grand buildings like these are usually hidden from sight. You can see the back of the rectory here, but yeah, the frontage is, you know, what you're usually interested in, isn't it? You can't see it though. Never mind, never mind. We'll carry on up Rectory Lane. Now this eventually turns into a footpath, and when we reach that footpath, we'll be heading towards our next landmark. It's another kind of hidden in plain sight landmark as well. Back to the map, and this is the southeastern portion of the village as it was in 1900. It looked a little sporadically populated, didn't it? Well, not a lot has changed. You see, the properties in this area are generally huge, most being set back from the road. This was never designed, though, to be a through route. So now we're on Manor Road, which you can get to via a small path at the end of Rectory Lane, which crosses a footbridge. That bridge has taken us over the old railway line. When the line was built, this road became Medbourne's access to Holt. It was formerly just a driftway that led to the manor house, but it was converted into a brand new, full-blown road. It was initially known as New Holt Road in recognition of the village it leads to. It was later renamed Manor Road for obvious reasons. And so this is the manor house, the oldest property of all in the village. It probably dates from the late 13th century. It's of a T-shaped plan consisting of a two-storied cross-wing with later attics and a hall block on its northern side, originally one story. The eastern slope of the hall's roof is original, but the western slope is much flatter. It's a really impressive building, this. In fact, it's so impressive that when the Cunards were in residence at Nevill Holt Hall, this manor house was used by at least one member of that family, Sir H. Cunard, the father of the famous activist Nancy. When he became master of the Ferny Hunt in 1878, the house was renovated for the use of the huntsman because the diversion of the Holt Road through its yard made it impossible to use as a farm. You can see some evidence of that renovation on the 1900 map. Bringing that back up again to show you, here you can see it says there are some kennels. They would have been built for the hunting pack. Cunard also built the cottages on the other side of the road, all with tile-hung and jetty gables, dated 1818. At the lower end of Manor Road now, on its southern side, is Dale Farm. This is a compact H-planned house of the late 17th century with steep hipped slate roofs. Its tall, symmetrically placed chimney stacks are of limestone ashlar, something a little different when compared to what we've seen so far. Okay, so after Dale Farm, the road comes to an end just up there at the War Memorial, which we'll see in a little while. We are going to take a left turn at this point, and the rain is starting to come down, so I need to get my skates on here. It's going to be quite heavy from what I understand. There we have an old bowling green. That's next to talk about. The southwestern part of Medbourne is a lot busier in terms of its landmarks. Marked on the 1900 map, you can see a school, the church, and the route of Medbourne Brook. There was far more here at this time. Not shown here are two pubs, one of which is still in business. Let's go and see them. Almost immediately after Dale Farm, you come to a green that's partially hidden behind some trees. This is the bowling green, which used to be part of another old inn called the Horse and Trumpet. The parish council own this today, thanks to the generosity of one Jim Price. Jim Price was the previous owner of the Horse and Trumpet, and here is that old pub, which still overlooks the bowling green today. It's a rubble-walled building which dates from the late 18th century. The Horse and Trumpet name is a direct reference to hunting. The inn occupied this building since 1870, but in 1844 a house of the same name stood close to the site of the village school, suggesting it moved at some point between those two dates. In any event, this is no longer a pub. It does still have a business use though. It's now a restaurant and a B&B establishment. The building has recently been renovated and the thatched roof has restored it to a former glory. Incidentally, there's an important house to the south of this old pub. It's literally called the Old House, and one of its rather unusual features is an old gas house in its garden. It originally manufactured gas for the local stables and some of the cottages, but most importantly, it also did so for Nevill Holt Hall. Now we're at the end of Manor Road, where you can see a row of red brick terrace cottages. That's School Row, and they sit right next to the old village school. As we learned earlier, the old school is now used as the village hall. Both the school and the schoolhouse were built in 1868 and 69 in a Gothic style, richly ornamented with fish scale roof tiles, terracotta ridge tiles, and cast iron window frames. Medbourne has no school today and hasn't ever since this closed in 1981. It does still get well used by the locals as the village hall though. You often find it's busy on Sundays during the summer when local groups hold a range of events to raise funds for the village. It's not a bad place to nip in for a tea stop if you're passing through. Okay, on the other side of the road from the village hall you have a phone box, but also a telephone exchange as well. Not that you can see it because there's a spot of rain on the camera. Hold on. Does that make it better? No? Well, it's there anyway. I promise you it's there. This is Ashley Road, or the B664 for all of those who like road numbers. It's the main road from Market Harborough and the village of Ashley just to the south. It enters Medbourne after crossing the River Welland via a county bridge designed by Joseph Finrace in 1820. You can't miss the largest landmark on Ashley Road. It's this huge old stable block which has now been converted into a set of houses. These were built by Sir H. Cunard to house the Fernie Hunt's horses until they moved to Great Bowden in 1924. As well as seeing the stables, we're also using this road to find our way to a pub. Now, as we know from yesterday, Nevill was an important name in these parts. Nevill Holt has never had its own boozer, so it's always been up to Medbourne to provide one with that family connection. I loved this section of the walk. It sees us traverse the edge of the brook that gives Medbourne its name. This is the Nevill Arms Inn, which faces the Medbourne Brook. It's a two-storey ironstone building built in a Tudor style, and it dates from 1863. The inn was rebuilt by Captain G.R. Nevill, the brother and heir of Cosmos George Nevill, the once owner of the Nevill Holt estate. It had to be rebuilt because the original pub was destroyed by a fire. The Nevill Arms today is the only pub that's still going in Medbourne. All the others have closed down and been converted to houses, or in the case of the Horse and Trumpet, have other commercial uses. The pub is joined on the western side of the brook by a number of 17th century ironstone houses, including Sadler's Cottage. Okay, there's several references in this area to a waterfall. There's a waterfall way close to the pub, and there's a waterfall cottage or waterfall house is one of these buildings here. Now, the waterfall in question isn't much of a waterfall, but I suppose it is one. It's here. Can you see there? Just a little one in the brook. The Medbourne Brook, which we're now going to follow by crossing back over this bridge. I've just come over this and heading that way, past the back of the village hall. The footpath which runs along the side of the brook is known as the towpath by the locals, but this isn't a canal, or at least that's what you might think at first. Peaceful and pretty are two words I'd use to describe this watercourse, but it hasn't always been this way. Flooding used to be a major issue for Medbourne, but that's no longer the case. The course of the brook now runs via canalised channels to both the north and south of the village. Medbourne continued to flood until the 1980s, before defences were implemented to prevent it. The towpath leads to Manor Farm, opposite which you can find this orientation table showing local points of interest. It was designed and erected by villagers to commemorate the millennium, with funding from the Arts Council. And so to the centre of the village, which used to be a large rectangular green, partially bounded by the Medbourne Brook. The high ground on the western side of the brook is where the mosaic pavement of a Roman villa was once found. It was discovered in 1721, and its discovery has led historians to believe that Medbourne was once a substantial Roman settlement. The Romans were definitely once here, that fact is undeniable. Medbourne was a market town on the Via Divana, the Roman route from Chester to Colchester. The middle of the village would have been a Roman marketplace, but there's no market here today. There is a war memorial though on the small green opposite the church. This was erected in 1920 after the end of World War I. It honours those lost in both World Wars, a total in this village of 21 men. There were 19 casualties in World War I and 2 in World War II. The memorial is constructed of Weldon stone, but the base is Clipsham stone, made by Marlowe & Sons of Hallerton. Okay, maybe a bit of good news. The blue sky is returning over the top of the church, which is our next landmark to see. I'm just at the edge of the churchyard here. There is the church. So let's go and find the gate and get into this one. The Church of St Giles stands on the northern side of the green in the centre of the village. As religious sites go, this is one of the oldest in Leicestershire. Originally, there was a church built where this one stands in around 1000 AD. However, that was destroyed by fire in 1270 and a new church was erected in its place, finally being completed in 1320. The core of that church is the one that still occupies this ancient site. The tower is slightly newer, added as it was in around 1370. Extensive renovations were undertaken in the 17th century. More recently, the chancel was rebuilt in 1876, as was the nave in 1811 and again in 1880. The south transept was reimagined in 1912. So in short, St Giles is a bit of a historical mishmash these days, but it still serves Medbourne well. Inside there's a carved oak pedestal and some lovely ironwork in the choir stalls. Both of those were made by local craftsmen. Between some early English pillars there are indications that a screen once stretched the length of the south transept. The north transept used to be the parish schoolroom, but that was abandoned when it moved into the new building in 1869. Afterwards it was used as a storeroom before becoming the parish room and the vestry in 1963. When the nave was rebuilt in 1880, the current pews and furnishings were added. The 13th century circular font was placed on a new stem in 1882, and its 4 shafts attached to the basin were continued to the base. The beautiful south window was designed by E.B. Nevinson, the cousin of the rector at that time. The Friends of Leicester Infirmary gave the east window of the transept to the church in 1940 in recognition of their founder, William Watts, who for many years was Medbourne's curate. There are 6 bells here. 5 were cast in 1768, whilst the 6th was hung in 1952. The clock was given by a former rector, the Reverend L.P. Baker, in 1852. As for the weather vane, that was probably made in about 1890 and was presented to the church by Sir H. Cunard. Now we come to perhaps the most impressive feature of Medbourne, the Packhorse Bridge. This has been extremely important to the village over the centuries, particularly when it used to have all those issues with floodwater. The roads from Slawston and Hallerton enter the village from the west, and in doing so they cross the brook by a low concrete bridge. It's what's known as an Irish bridge, and it replaced a ford which served as access to Medbourne before 1935. In times of flood, the ford was impassable. The Packhorse Bridge, therefore, was used instead to allow access to the village. This narrow stone structure has round, chamfered arches and triangular cutwaters. It dates from medieval times, but it stood the test of time impressively. The surface and handrails, though, are modern replacements. Absolutely love a packhorse bridge, I do. Every time I come across one, I'm just left in awe of the construction techniques they had back in those days. Now, the sun has made a reappearance. The blue sky is back, the sun is here, the rain has stopped, so the glasses are going back on. We haven't got much left though. So at this point here, just after the packhorse bridge, you're then on this road, which we're about to follow for a short distance. We're heading towards the playing field. Now we have a longish walk to do up the Hallerton Road. For a good way, this seems to be a whole lot of nothing, but there's a reason for that. We're skirting the edge of the playing field, which we're about to cross. Before we do that though, we have something else to see. We've come to learn over our time in Leicestershire so far that this county is a bit of a hidden gem when it comes to camping. Medbourne is perhaps an unlikely place for a campsite, but you can pitch up right here at Rural Relaxing. You don't even have to have a tent to visit this place. You can just pop in here on Saturday and Sunday mornings if you fancy the cafe it has on site. That's a haven for dog walkers and cyclists, with many adamant that it's a must-stop destination for a hearty breakfast. The Sports and Social Club is located on the road to Hallerton, right on the northern edge of the village. On this ground, Medbourne's football and cricket teams play their home games. The parish council own the upper part of this sports field, along with the tennis courts area and the land below them. This is the pavilion, which is used by all the sports clubs. It was rebuilt and opened in 1984 with the aid of local fundraising, grants and volunteers. The building is dedicated to the memory of a popular local sportsman called Stephen Burrows, who tragically lost his life at a young age. There's nothing like a good playing field, and I do like to see one that's immaculately kept like this one is here in Medbourne. You see, it's not just about sports for me. Sometimes playing fields have other hidden features, and there's certainly one of those here in Medbourne. Behind the pavilion, you can see there's some trees. Well, that's not all there is there. Behind the pavilion, below the tennis courts, lies the nature conservation area known as Medbourne Hollow. It was originally a clay pit, which had been left derelict to become a rough, marshy area. That was until local volunteers decided to gather interest and support to excavate 2 pools and plant trees and shrubs to encourage birds, butterflies and wildflowers. With the help of grants and donations, the area was transformed in the spring of the year 2000. Sports-wise, cricket and football dominate these playing fields. Despite being in Leicestershire, Medbourne FC play in the Northamptonshire Combination League. That's the 7th level of the English non-league pyramid. The playing field also includes a children's play area which is owned by the Medbourne Educational Foundation Trust. The playground was completely refurbished to commemorate the millennium with help of grants from the National Lottery, Medbourne Charities and Harborough District Council. And our route finishes with a look at the old Queen House as we re-enter the middle of Medbourne via a footpath that runs back to it. A thatched property, the old Queen House is formerly an inn which closed at some point after 1905. It stands between Springbank and the Medbourne Brook. It has a date stone which tells us it was built in 1733, but that doesn't give you the whole story. Part of its lower north wing probably belonged to an earlier structure. And here we are again outside the shop, so from here it's just a case of walking back to Old Holt Road to finish the route on foot. But we haven't finished with Medbourne just yet. We've yet to see what happened to the old railway station. Right, we are in familiar territory. Here we have Paget's Farm and the Old Holt Road. And that's been a really nice walk around actually. Seeing all sorts of weird and wonderful things here in Medbourne. But we aren't quite done with this village just yet, because we have still to talk about the railway station, because Medbourne did have a station on the old railway line which cuts across the end of Old Holt Road. Now to get to the station we have to go up here. I'll see you there in a moment. The map, once again, is our friend as it shows us the location of the station. To get to this, you have to drive to the north for about a quarter of a mile. It's a fair old way out of the village, you know. The station was located next to a bridge, which still exists over the old railway line. Medbourne railway station was on the Great Northern and London and North Western Joint Railway. It sat between Hallerton Junction to the north and Drayton Junction to the south. Both junctions were connected to Welham Junction to the west. The station was built in 1879 by the LNWR but didn't open until 1883, 4 years after the Great Northern Railway completed the double-tracked line between Leicester Belgrave Road and Peterborough North. Services from the station were all GNR, hence the delayed date. In 1916, during World War I, Medbourne Station was closed to passengers as a war economy, although by this time the line had been reduced to a single track. Shortly afterwards, the building accidentally burned down, though the shell of the building remained until the onset of World War II. Medbourne Station was one of two that the village once had access to. The other was Ashley and Western Railway Station to the south on the London and North Western Railway. Its original name reflected Medbourne's proximity. It was known as Medbourne Bridge until 1879. It closed too in 1952. As for the line, that continued in use until 1964, being used mainly for goods. It has since been lifted, leaving Medbourne with no railway access at all now. Not that it will ever be reopened, of course. You'd have to knock down the Batters estate to do that. So folks, that's Medbourne. What did you think? Is this the most desirable place to live in all of Leicestershire? Let me know in the comments below whether you're from the village or not. Just before we leave this one behind, here's a fun fact which I've purposely not mentioned until now. Medbourne is famous for competing with Hallerton in a wacky event called bottle kicking. It takes place every year on Easter Monday. I haven't covered it here because I'm planning on being in Hallerton for the actual event next year. Watch this space. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.